Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for our third webinar of our Spotlight series this month, which is on the topic of communicating your research. So I'm obviously not Agostina. My name's Rebecca Perry. I lead the priority-driven research development portfolio at Health Translation SA, and I'm filling in for Agostina today and absolutely delighted to be able to hear and learn from Elodie and Susan. But before we get to that, I'd just like to acknowledge that, oh, hang on, I need to move my slides. Now, actually, can you see my slides? Sorry, I should check. And is it the full slide?
No.
No. Sorry, everyone.
Maybe if you click on the lectern down the bottom, it will go to full slide.
Susan, you said you were no good at Teams.
That's PowerPoint.
Yeah. So thank you. So I'll just start by acknowledging that the Kaurna people are the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region, which is where I'm today. I recognise their cultural, spiritual, physical and emotional connection to the land, and I honour and pay my respects to Kaurna elders past, present and to the future. So I imagine that a lot of us are on Kaurna land today, but for those that aren't, please feel free to indicate where you're joining us from in the chat. So before we hear from our presenters today, I'd just like to just provide you with a quick overview of what the Spotlight series is. So this is an initiative that was launched by Health Translation SA in November 2021 as a way to build knowledge and capacity in a range of essential research translation skills and topics which may not be well understood. And we do this through a month-long focused education initiative. And this includes 4 online webinars where we hear from a range of experts and we dedicate our socials to sharing resources related to the topic. So this month is our 9th series where we're talking about communicating research, and we've had previous series covering implementation science, research impact, community engagement, the MRFF, health economics and patient-reported measures. So on our website, you'll find all those webinar recordings and resources related to the topic. So I'd really encourage you to check those out if you've missed any of those previous sessions. And then also briefly, just describing who we are and reminding you that we're an NHMRC accredited research translation centre. We offer a collaborative cross-sectorial approach to research and enabling translation of findings into improved patient care. So essentially we seek to connect the health researchers and health services with the right stakeholders and partners to accelerate the implementation of research discoveries. So we have 11 partners and they're listed on the screen there, representing academic, research and healthcare agencies. So this slide just outlines our vision and purpose. And so, you know, really at a high level, our vision is to accelerate the translation of research findings to improve the health of South Australians. And we work with our partners and other stakeholders and as an independent catalyst to broker and mobilise collaborations that address major health system challenges. So we do this in a variety of ways, as illustrated on this diagram. And you can see that the box around the education and training is where the Spotlight series sits. So today, we will be hearing from Dr. Elodie Janvier and Professor Susan Hillier. So I'm just going to quickly provide an introduction to both of our speakers, and then I will hand over to them to get things underway. So firstly, Elodie, and I am going to have to read this out. Elodie joined BidRite in 2022, bringing over 10 years experience in strategic bid development in the university sector. Elodie has managed and consulted on more than 500 bids, with major successes in the university context, including a $240 million Defence Trailblazer project, an ARC Centre of Excellence, and ARC Laureate Fellowship. Wow. In 2020, Elodie won an award for excellence granted by the University of Adelaide, recognising her distinguished contributions to the university's bidding endeavours and resulting increases in win rates. Elodie holds master's level qualifications in engineering and science and the Association of Proposal Management Professionals, APMP, practitioner level certification. And then Professor Susan Hillier is an academic and clinician with teaching and research interests in the broad field of neuroscience and rehabilitation. One of her main research areas is on the effectiveness of rehabilitation approaches after stroke, and the influence of rehabilitation on neuroplasticity is also a focus. Susan also has an interest in movement education and intervention approaches for other populations, such as children with developmental coordination disorder or people who are ageing. As well as conducting clinical trials to produce primary evidence, Susan is also an experienced Cochrane reviewer. Susan, on top of all of this, still maintains a small private practice. She's a physiotherapist at the university and contributes to the community through her work with stroke organisations locally and nationally. Susan teaches regularly in Australia and internationally to assist clinicians to implement best practice, and she's supervised 21 candidates to completion in PhD programs in Australia and overseas. And her current role is at the University of South Australia as Dean of Research for UniSA Allied Health and Human Performance. So we're very lucky to have two extremely qualified and experienced presenters today. And before I hand over to Elodie, if anyone in the audience has any questions of any of the presenters, feel free to put them into the chat and we'll do our best to get to as many of those as possible at the end of the presentation. So just type them in and then I'll read through them at the end. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand over to Elodie.
Thanks, Rebecca. First, also thank you for the honorary doctorate. I'm not a doctor, but it was interesting.
Okay.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here today. So as Rebecca said, my name is Elodie. I'm a managing consultant at BidRite. And we are an organization that's dedicated to help our clients win more opportunities through targeted support activities. And as Rebecca said again, before joining BidRite, I worked in the higher education sector for about 10 years, mostly in strategic research development roles, managing the development and implementation of collective, but also individual research strategies, as well as providing the underpinning support to that effect, which did include conceptualizing and writing grants. So today I'm really excited to share insights on how we can apply what I've learned since leaving the university sector, which is the international best practice in bidding and persuasive writing, to the world of research grants specifically. I've got a lot to cover, So I will not be talking in details to all my slides, but rather I've chose to build the deck that I will share with you after, so that it's a good resource for you if you want to use it when writing an application. All right, let's dive in. If my mouse wants to. All right, so I'll start with setting the scene, because the brief that was given to me was what's in a winning round, and it's very broad. So I'll just give you some parameters around which I've designed today's presentation. Then we'll look into what does win in that context, how we can distill that into key elements of a persuasive proposal, and then importantly, how we can concretely use those concepts into our drafting process when you run an application. So I'll start by setting the scene, because again, in this presentation, I've assumed a lot of things. And the first one is that you have chosen an opportunity that is a good match, right? In terms of the funder's objective, the scope, the scale, the track record, the team around you, you're competitive, right? I know we love to say that the funding system is a lottery, and I'm not here to confirm or deny, but you need to be in it with a chance, right? Otherwise, it's better to spend your time actually positioning yourself to be more competitive in a future opportunity. And as I just mentioned, I align today's content to international best practice. So while sometimes the terminology might seem a bit industry or foreign, I've actually made sure that it applies to the concept of research. So, and I'll walk you through that. All right, so there are 4 key factors in terms of increasing your odds of winning, or having a winning application. And today's brief was around the communication piece, which is the third one, the persuasion. But I'll walk you through the 4 factors. So first, positioning. So in terms of research, it means to do all the right things to increase your odds before you start, like publishing a paper in that specific subdomain as first or last author, depending on how that works in your field, publishing a paper with the right collaborators, establishing some co-supervision of students, building some capability around you, applying for awards, all of that stuff. Then there's the compliance aspect, which is not just the compliance that's performed by your research office. It's also, in some applications that are not the traditional ARC or NHMRC or MRFF, it's really understanding the question and why they're asking you that question and what they want to know, and making sure you answer all parts of the questions. The fourth one is pricing, and while pricing is obviously more important in the industry world, where some decisions are really solely based on price, which is not the case in research, it's still important to consider your budget carefully and strategically. But today I'm here to talk about number 3. So persuasive writing, which means that if you're on the same footing on the other 3, you still have a chance to put a better foot forward and write a compelling application. So what does win? Well, science and research, you'll enjoy that, tells us that it's a combination of 2 things, all right? It's the application that best communicates, that they can deliver greatest value against what the party that's making the assessment and decision making is after, and you can do that better than your competition. So what do we mean by value? Typically, there are 5 types of values. I won't read these out. You can read them for yourself now with the handout. But importantly, why that language seems, again, very industry-focused and foreign. If you think about it, it does apply to research. So, for example, if you're developing a new diagnostic tool, there will be obviously the cost to the healthcare system, its reliability, will it reduce the likelihood of a disease, will it prevent disease? Is the treatment, how much is the treatment reducing the impact of the disease, and so on. So that's something that you can refer to when you're trying to define the value of what you're proposing, because it's key to having a winning ground. It's really understanding the value you're proposing and how that relates to what other can offer. So it's the team who best communicate that value. And secondly, it's the team that best communicate that they can be trusted to deliver as promised. So how do we build trust? Well, trust is the combination of three things. And two of them are quite frequently found in, reasonably good application, which is first the logic. You're explaining your concept, your rationale, your methodology, clear design, and then there is the authenticity, which is a proof element. So you're giving your track record, preliminary data, all of that. What is less often found, whether in bids or in grants, is the empathy part, right? That shows that we understand what the funder or the evaluator or client is trying to achieve. It can be trickier for grants because more often than not, there's not a clear scope of work. But and we need to think beyond the funding objective. So, but even more so, there are ways in which we can write that show that we have this empathy lens to our application, and that will make a big difference to your application and persuasion. And I'll cover some of those later in the presentation. So the key is you truly understand the decision maker's needs and weightings from their perspective. Your offer truly communicates best value over others, and you have communicated what you can be trusted to deliver. So importantly, understand that it's not just about the team that has the best value and the team that can be trusted more. It's about the team that communicates that best. Because there are many things that everyone offers, but you're the only one making it clear. So now we're going to look at the elements of a persuasive proposal and how we can communicate effectively. So persuasive proposal require 5 things. So we want a story that is customer focused or funder focused, evaluator focused, and user focused. So it's not focused through your lens and what you want to be doing, but through their lens and what they need. Then we need a winning story, a win strategy. And that's something I'll take a bit more time on because I've rarely seen that, if ever, applied in a research grant proposal world as a concept. Want an easy to understand story, a credible story, and a well-presented story. Not only to make a good impression, but it factors into the easy to read and understand concept. And now I'll go a bit into details. So obviously it's very important to know your audience first so that you can achieve that audience focus. So processes and level of expertise will vary depending on who you're applying to or for, what for, but regardless of the opportunities and the funding entity, there's very few likely commonalities to consider to inform your style of communication, right? They will have limited time and many other applications to consider. There will always be someone, the assessor, that looks in depth of your application, whether it's a spokesperson, a program manager, your first person on the grant, the person that will need to summarize and pitch that to the decision-making entity, whether it's a grant review panel, it's a senior person in the industry that holds the purse strings, whether it's the panel of deputy secretary, the minister. So there's likely, and if not always, at least one lay person in the assessment or decision-making process that you need to pitch to. So as a consequence, you need to make sure that your application is speed readable, it's easy to understand, it's easy to reconstruct and pitch, and it's memorable. So how do we achieve that? So at BidRight, we've developed a framework that's called ISBP that helps you not only think about the way you need to communicate, but it helps structure your writing. So in key sections such that the executive summary in the world of bids, or the first page of your 5 of 10 pager in a grant, or your methodology section or your capability section. So the way is to start with the issues always. What? Why? Right? Why is it important? Why does it matter? what really matter. So what are they going to base their decision to fund you? Right? There's 3 to 5 key reasons for that. Then you're going to introduce your solution to those issues, and that's usually what people start with upfront instead of having this empathy piece at the beginning. Then you're going to talk to the benefits as to your specific approach compared to anyone else. And then you support that with a proof element, and you give evidence, your preliminary data as the track record. And we'll see a bit later how we can apply that as an example. So winning story, as I said, that's something I rarely see used, if ever, and it's really the core of bidding tender best practice in industry. So it's critical for 2 reasons. First, it creates a clarity on why us and why not someone else. Because we don't want to be bombarding assessors with hundreds of different things like features, facts that are not clearly directly linked as to why they should pick us. We want is to create 3 to 5 key messages because that's what people can absorb when they're reading an application. Then, unless you're doing a fellowship application, often you're going to be writing as a team with collaborators, and you're going to need to make decisions and write together on different parts. So you need to create a consensus with your writing team or decision-making team as to what to emphasize in your response and what your key themes are, so that it sounds cohesive and everyone is saying the same thing. So how do you develop your win theme? So first you start by assessing the bigger picture. So whether it's the strategic objective of the funder or the state of the art in your field. You review the scope of work to understand what they really want, if there's a scope of work. And then that's when you look at determining the quote client end quote issues, because in your case the client will be multiple people more often than not, right? It will be the assessor, meaning the funding body's objectives, or someone in your field that has their own view about what's important in your field. For government and agency, it could be alignment with broader strategies, leveraged, state, national, international funding, innovation to solve industry challenge. For an industry, it could be accessing, students and with special knowledge or having them learn from them, access to research facility, access to highly educated yet relatively cheap human resources. But it's also the end users of the technology or anything you're proposing, right? So, or your colleagues in your field. So analyze that critically for each opportunity. It will be different. And then when you've determined this kind of 5 major key client issues, which are the key reasons why they would decide to fund you, analyze your competition against those issues and critically examine your own capability against that. Based on that, you should be able to develop 3 to 5 key messages as to why it's you and not them. If you can't do that, maybe it's not the right time or the right opportunity. You need to be clear as to why it's you and now. So here on the next slide, I won't go through it, but I've put additional questions that you can consider in the context of research to help you with that kind of exercise. So as I mentioned before, it's critical to provide a strong project summary that can be read in seconds to excite assessors in reading the rest of your application, and it helps your spokesperson prepare their pitch to the other. So here I've laid a structure that aligns with the ISBP, and you can use when writing your grant. So you start with, setting the stage, the importance, why is it important, why is it urgent, what is the problem you're trying to solve. Then you lay out your solution, your concept, and you also provide a rationale as to why it's feasible, yet innovative. And then you create a vision. So what? Basically, why do we need to care, right? So a non-expert must be convinced rapidly that the problem is real, it's significant, and it's addressable. So moving on to an easy to understand story. So as I said, you will have people with various level of expertise in what you're proposing. So we all know that, so I'm not going to read the slide, but it's very important that you consider grant writing not as, academic writing. It's paramount to manage the right balance of technicality with accessibility. So an example of how you can do that is to front load, each paragraph or major section with a lay statement or a lay summary, and then you can dive a bit deeper to satisfy the technical experts. But make sure that a non-expert can skim read and still understanding what you're conveying. Other examples of clear writing techniques, signposting is very important. So it's you telling the reader where they're going, where they can find all the important things. You remind them of what they've read, and importantly, you give them advance notice about what they're gonna read and they're gonna come across. So you want your assessor's reading journey to not be interrupted and to be as smooth as possible. You don't want to have them stop and ask them questions. Oh, they haven't talked about that. You're talking about that next page, but they don't know that. So a way of doing that is to say, in this section, I'm going to talk about this, this, this. It takes real estate on your page, but it's very important. You want to avoid passive voice because it sounds tentative and it creates confusion as to who does what. Jargon, as I said, you want to build intimacy using pronouns like we and you, and that helps, with the empathy piece. And you want to keep sentences and paragraphs short. So in terms of readability, there are actually concrete metrics that you can evaluate yourself against your writing. So I've listed them on the left. And there's a fantastic tool in Word, in editors, that can actually look at that for you, basically. If you click on document stat, it will tell you if your document is easy to read and meets all those metrics. Moving on to a credible story. So while grant writing is, and I give you a trigger warning of a dirty word, a sales document, we do want to build trust and authenticity, so we want to avoid proposal speak as much as possible, right? So that means avoiding fluff. Words like world-class, industry-leading, best in breed, they're overused. Only use them if you can back them up by evidence, right? Then we want to avoid guff, right? Words that are unnecessarily complex or redundant. Simplify your writing. Geek, I mentioned it. Last but not least is the whistle, right? So I appreciate that in research, we can't always be definitive. We have to, have a decent out if the research doesn't pan out as we want it, but try to remove as much word that convey vagueness as possible and try to be specific and quantify things as much as you can. Then for research grants, it's really critical to provide a strong case for feasibility. So it's the usual suspects, your preliminary data, your research design, CI team track record, the capacity, the research environment, so why you, why there, and a clear and well-justified budget to show that, you have all the appropriate resources that are appropriate to the scale of your project. Now, well presented, right? So we want to avoid too much cram space. Dense applications are hard to read and get people offside, right? So rule of thumb, not a single page of just text. A page should not be just text, right? So there are 4 ways to make your content pop. First one, obvious, bullets and tables. The second one is headlines, not headings, to capture attention. So that means if it's not prescribed by the funding rules or the instruction to applicants or whatever guidelines, you can transform a section headings into the key message that applies to that section. So for example, instead of saying team expertise, you can say our capabilities are derived from, extensive experience, collective experience, delivering impactful research, something like that. Graphics, obviously, so complex information is often easier to understand when it's presented visually. So studies suggest our brain process like 60,000 times faster than text, and we remember 80% of what we see compared to 20% of what we read. So, but importantly, be mindful that graphics shouldn't be overly complex. As a rule of thumb, graphics should be understood under 10 seconds. Otherwise, it increases the likeliness of people giving up and moving on. Callouts are like that little boxes that you can put in your text to draw attention to key message in the application. So I'm just going to give you a quick examples of, which one would you rather read, which one is the one where you can skim read and understand what it's about. So how do we put all those things in practice? So we bring them together through a 3-draft process. Draft 1 is where we plan what we write. We do basically, it's just bullet points, right? And we look at it as a content map or a blueprint of that section. You look at the question, you understand really what they're after. You look, which means what are the issues? Solution, what do you offer in terms of responding to that issue, the benefits, why is your project or yourself better placed than someone else? And then you finish by proof element and highlight and link to any main themes you have. So at this stage, it's just bullet points of, and maybe the graphics you want to have in that section. So you're just making like a content plan of what you're going to write. And that's your first draft. The second draft is just about getting it done and writing. Don't care about your style or anything, just write it from the bullet point. And the third draft is where you polish. You refine the structure, you look at your narrative flow, you read it out loud to see if it, really flows. You use all those persuasive techniques that I've mentioned. You clean your wording, you simplify, you reduce the word count, you use bullet points, you put graphics, callouts. And voila, that's my not so secret sauce. Thank you, and I understand we'll take question at the end. So I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Elodie. That was so useful, and I loved how practical it was as well. I've been making notes. I'm not going to share any of my notes just yet because I know we might be pushed for time. But thank you so much for sharing those tricks of the trade. Now we'll hand over to Susan, and I'm going to share the slides here.
At what time would you like us to finish up?
Well, we're finishing technically at 1, okay. But if we could finish, say, 10 to perhaps.
Yep.
And then we'll have some time for questions.
Cool. Okay.
Great. Thank you. Now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Okay.
So I'll just be asking back to click. So sorry to have that interruption. Thank you very much for including me in the discussion. So if people have any questions afterwards, I've put my email address there. I'm happy to answer them. I'll come at this hopefully maybe from the point of view of sitting on a lot of panels for Cat 1 grants. And we do write tenders and consultancies as well, but I'll try and stick with the Cat 1. So mostly on NHMRC, MRFF panels, and what are some of the things to not do and some things to do. So next slide, please. So to remind you, and I think this fits in really well with Elodie's points, this is a pitch. You are asking for money. And I am unashamedly now, have worked a lot, got a lot of ideas from our marketing teams at UniSA, because, and I think, Elodie's put them into some really good contexts, but we need to be really clear about this. This is not a scholarly paper. It is a pitch. We are asking for money, and it's public money, generally speaking, or philanthropic money. So we need to make sure that what we're asking for is really worthwhile. It's going to be of use. So you need to get into that mindset first, because I read a lot of grants where it's like, well, I'm fantastic. I've got a fantastic idea, and you should fund me because I'm terrific. If you have that view, get rid of it, because there's no point in that. Maybe you get away with it if you're a 75-year-old crusty professor. I don't know that you do, but generally speaking, it doesn't fly. So do see this as a research Shark Tank, where you having to persuade us in a very competitive pool that what you've got is going to be useful to invest in. You're asking for an investment. So next slide, please. So to remind you, the standard grant headings, and I'll go through these in a funny order, but you'll maybe see why. Thinking about the project title and you'll need to have a really clear, pithy summary in lay language. And let's just say that's usually quite badly done. So get somebody who is lay, like your grandma or your grandpa, to read it, because I read them and sometimes they're so full of jargon that I don't even understand them. And you've got to recognize that your reviewers are intelligent reviewers, but not necessarily in your area. So if your lay language summary is full of jargon, and I like to say, do not have any letters and numbers in them, so those of you who are into sort of biochemistry sort of stuff, don't pepper your lay language with that, because most of us don't know what they are. So treat us like an intelligent uncle or auntie, or however you want to see it, so that the research question specific aims are clear. They won't come first. And you have a background. Actually, I won't go through this slide because I'll go through it in bits. Next slide, please. So this is just another way of saying what Elodie said, that in simple terms, you need to have a narrative that holds your grant together. And you need to make sure that this narrative fits the grant, because as a reviewer, I am looking for ways to not have to read your grant. So if there's something really obvious in there that doesn't fit the criteria of the grant, I am looking for them. I want them there because I don't want to read. I've got 25 grants to read in depth. I want to get rid of as many as possible. So I'm looking for ways. So the narrative, this is from marketing, is that there's got to be something that we care about. So there's some kind of baby or population. We were talking about health research here. So there's a group of people that we're worried about. And we're worried about them because they've got a werewolf that's attacking their health and well-being. Thank you. And that could be cancer. It could be autism. It could be, be careful about that, because it might not be a werewolf. It might be marvelous. But there's something that's a problem that's affecting something that we care about. And then hopefully your grant has got the silver bullet. What's going to be the solution to this? Now, this doesn't always hold. Sometimes the grants are about understanding the baby or understanding the werewolf more in order to then devise a better silver bullet, and that's fine. But these elements of the narrative have to be there. There has to be this story about that firstly convinces us we need to care about this. It's a big problem. Maybe there's only a few babies, but it's a very nasty werewolf. Maybe there's hundreds of babies with a tiny werewolf. Either way, we have to be convinced that this is a story that we want to keep reading about. So these elements need to be on that crucial first page. Next slide, please. If you don't like, go back just one. If you don't like the baby werewolf silver bullet thing, then it's who do we care about? What's the problem and how you'll fix it? And these should be aligning with the criteria for the grant scheme, if that's what you're doing. If it doesn't, don't bother. So the population and the problem should be clearly kind of delineated in the grants. If it's something like an ideas grant and it's kind of open slather, then you need to still use this kind of formula, but you've got more scope because they're looking for general. If it's an unmet needs grant, then that's what you do. It's a rare cancers grant, that's what you do. If it's your an investigative a fellowship kind of thing, you still have to have this narrative, because it's not about you. I mean, in that sense, it's about what you're going to make a difference in. So next slide. So your background section. Now we're not on the first page anymore. I think that Elodie's covered that really well. In the background section, what I really don't like is selective reporting. People will just pick out a few. So let's say there's something in the stroke area, and people were really interested in brain stimulation for a while, and they'll cherry pick 3 studies that said that non-invasive brain stimulation has a great effect on stroke. I know that there are 33 other studies that say it doesn't work. So if you've written a grant, and I actually read this a lot, particularly in my area, which is fatal, where they'll just cherry pick, and I'll just write and say, no, this grant shouldn't be funded because these people have not even shown that they could be trusted because they haven't reviewed the literature properly. So best of all is if you've got a systematic review that you've done that shows that there is a gap in the literature, or shows what we know and then shows what we don't know. That would be the ultimate, is that you've actually done a systematic search. So there's no cherry picking. It's all above board. And I can read that and I go, oh, these people really know what they're talking about. They have looked at the literature systematically. There's no bias in the way they've looked at it. So they have genuinely come into this problem with an open mind about what is needed. They're not just trying to push their little tinker toy or their little whatever career advancing idea. So it could be based on the literature like that, but make sure that it's well read. And if the literature is divided, say that. Say that, well, some studies say this works, some studies say it doesn't. We're going to provide the definitive study to answer the question once and for all. So don't be shy about setting up the argument, but don't be biased. That's my big thing, because it drives us scientists nuts, because it's poor science. It could be based on clinical data, say that, or assumptions, if so, say that, or you could have anecdotally, you could have a bright idea. And here's what we know, here's what we don't know. There's a lot that we don't know. We're going to systematically address this knowledge gap. So make that really clear. Is it the baby we don't understand? Is it the werewolf we don't understand? Is it the silver bullet we don't understand? Next slide, please. So by convincing them, these are some questions you could ask yourself. What is the problem? Who does it affect? How many? How badly? What does help? What's known? What's the gap? Do you have a solution? Why do you think it's a good idea? What's the rationale or basis for that? The rationale could be biological, it could be theoretical, clinical evidence, all of that ultimately. And this could be also summarized in the first page, but why should we care? That's what the background should do. Why should we care? And do you have the right solution? Next slide, please. So these are the checks. Have you systematically reviewed? Has the research informed the research question? Is the research question answerable? Do the points of difference between the studies and the proposed research provide a strong justification or not? And what's the potential impact on health outcomes? And has it been justified? So if you're doing something working with cell lines and then you say, well, the impact of this is we're going to cure cancer, I'm going to call bullshit as well, because you say, well, actually, we're going to, ultimately, we want to cure cancer. But where we are here is we're here. And if we do this, then the next steps can happen. So situate your research in the continuum of impact. You don't have to claim the ultimate impact, but you have to know that that's where this is heading. Okay, next one. So the questions, you might have an overall aim. Your overall aim ultimately is to cure cancer, but you've got specific things you need to do. So whether your aims are to identify clinical problems or work with measurement or measure performance or understand reasons or causes or contributors or intervene or improve or implement, however it is, they're the main kinds of objectives that you might have. Not all of them, obviously, one in particular. Be really clear that that's what it's about. Then you come up with the questions. Make sure that they're answerable questions. And you may or may not have research hypotheses depending on your methods and your methodology. But remember, hypotheses are either yes or no. They're answered, they're supported, or they're refuted. So write them like that. Next slide, please. So measurement. Make it really clear what your sources of knowledge are. You know, where you're going, which participants, what stakeholders, supporters, experts, providers, where are you getting your data from? And then what are you getting? Data, numbers, descriptive, analytical. Maybe you're going to the literature. Maybe you're going to experience through qualitative research or stories and narratives. So these are all fine, but make it really clear where you're getting your source of knowledge from, where you're getting your measurement from, and why, obviously, will be in there as well. So all of these things have to match up. Next, please. Be clear about your research methods. Tell us what it is so that we know. And then that makes life easier. We don't have to search for it. And, you know, there are some, like at the moment, we're coming up to clinical studies and cohort trials panel for NH and MRC. Methodologically, if you're not spot on, you know, as an RCT or a cohort, you'll be out. It has to be pristine methodology. So be careful about, you know, depending on what scheme you're doing. And, you know, whether what you're doing in terms of these. Next slide, please. So that you've got the right methodology. And some of these are more likely to be assessed to be well regarded than others. Now, the team capacity and capability needs some careful thought. There is a tendency now to have like 20 or 30 people on a team. And again, I would cry bullshit about that because they cannot be all involved. They just cannot be, you know, it's a, I don't know, $900,000 grant with 30 people on it. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. So be very careful about understaffing or overstaffing your team. Whacking in a whole lot of international collaborators that don't have a clear role is not impressive, and it just makes people feel like this is padding. So whoever is in there, justify the mix of skills and knowledge that you need. It's not padding, that you actually need them. They're going to make this better, demonstrably better. It's always good now to have a range of career stages. So you may, depending on the scheme, you may have your strongest person as CIA, and that might not be you. You might be in the middle ranks. And I always say at this stage, the very first grant I was ever put on, I was actually a key person. They couldn't have done the grant without me, but I was an AI, not a CI. And the professor who was running the grant said, frankly, Susan, your track record would pull us down. Now, I think nowadays that's not the case, but you need to think about the tactics behind that. But certainly, if it's a very big grant and you put a junior person as CIA, you're not building trust because that CIA cannot have had experience running a very big grant. So you need to play to your strengths and you need to build up that trust. And de-risk the project. And if that means putting the person with the biggest track record at first, do it. If you've got somebody who you can demonstrably say they have project managed a project that was similar to this and now they're ready for the next step and they'll be mentored, then of course they can be CIA. But don't blow your chances by messing around with this too much. Play to your strengths. Similarly, don't put a really massive CIA track record up the front who's clearly not going to do anything. So this word justify is really, really important, that you've got this mix of skills and knowledge. You've got a mix of career stages. So you've got ECRs in there who are being mentored and who are learning, who are still in the apprenticeship. You've got mid-career people who are stepping up, and you've got the professors who are sitting, being mentors, actively engaged. Have the range of disciplines justified, and the lived experience as you need it. So the consumer engagement, the end users, the next users, the relevant stakeholders, so that the team is there, not tokenistic. I can't say this enough. Because MRFF and so on are so hot now and in consumer engagement, people are scrambling and we read some absolute rubbish. And the consumer engagement assessors on the panel, they'll just say, no, that's tokenistic. That's not real. They're not really involved. They haven't had any. So have a framework for involvement, have a framework for how this governance is going to work, have a really clear structure to show that all of these people are going to be involved. Next slide, please. Again, to de-risk, show that this is feasible, show that you know what you're doing, you've got all your processes lined up, you've got your time frames, and it's all reasonable. Nothing like a Gantt chart as a visual to show people, look, trust us, we know what we're doing. We've done it before. We're excellent project managers. Next slide, please. Budget, include the in-kind stuff and not padding. Again, make it real. What do you need to get this question answered? And not what you do. What do you personally need from a career point of view? What does the project need? If it's a project-based grant, What does the project need? Personnel, who, what skill, blah, blah, blah. Participants, what do you require for them? Equipment, consumables, and environment. What is reasonable to expect that your institution would provide versus what you need from a specialised point of view. Next slide. De-risk it again. So MRFF now insists on a risk matrix to show that you've de-risked and that you are trustworthy. So you can use these kinds of matrices, the standard kind of organisational ones. What's the likelihood and what's the consequence? And then you can list them in the categories of personnel and equipment and recruitment and all those sorts of things. Next slide, please. You have the right analysis. Now, again, if you're in clinical trials and cohorts and you don't do the right analysis, you'll be sunk. You know, some really call for economic analysis as well, or whatever it is. So make sure you've got the right analyses, the right team to do the analyses, because some of those sorts of very specialised schemes will have a health economist and a biostatistician on there, and if they don't like your team member or your analysis, you'll be down the gurgler. So be careful about that. Next slide, please. Think about then the translation plan. If you just write saying, oh, we'll write some papers and we will go to a conference and present, everybody's going to do that. So think about who needs to know about your work, the so what story, and what target audiences. So how you're going to get the information, if it needs to be for clinicians, if it needs to go to funders or health service providers or consumers or researchers or government or industry. Make sure that you talk about how you're going to disseminate that by clearly delineating who your audiences are and how you're going to change the format of your dissemination plan according to those. Papers, conference presentations, so what? Like, seriously. Next one, please. If it's a knowledge impact, then of course that is the so what, but you need to make it really clear. I won't go too much into the impact stuff, but thinking about what is the impact? What's the next level of use of your knowledge? If it's a knowledge impact, if there's going to be a health impact, economic impact, societal impact, or as I say, the onion of impact, is it going to impact on patients, a person, the family, the health service, industry, community, society? Be really clear, where is the impact? Now, if the impact is knowledge, like you're the cell lines in the curing cancer thing, then say that this is where there's a knowledge impact. This will progress, but make sure it's not just an incremental progression, or if it's an incremental, make it sure that it's an important progression. Next, please. Circles back to the baby, the werewolf, and the silver bullet. What will be gained? What's the potential? What are the next steps? So you're not going to cure cancer. What's the next step? Next slide. Now your title needs to be catchy and capture the population and the object of interest in the study design if possible, if that's relevant. So just some examples. Probably won't go through them. Next slide. No, we'll just skip through those. So there's just some examples. Final check. Write down the grant objectives again from their handout. Tick off that you've answered them. Ensure that they're obviously stated and where in your grant, even if you're using the same language as them. So, if their grant is to address unmet needs in culturally and linguistically diverse populations, use that language. Go again. And just, this is just a reminder to think about, where the gaps in knowledge are, why you're interested, who you are, what you're going to solve, and so forth. I think that's about it. Let's just stop there. Thank you for doing the driving.
No problem whatsoever. That was a pretty formidable slide deck. Thanks, Susan.
Sorry. Yeah.
Now, I'm just going to see if we have any questions. We've got a few minutes. If our participants, I've got one that's come through to me directly, but if anyone has any questions or comments, please just put them into the Q&A section, and I can read those out. We've got a query directly for Susan. You mentioned consumers sitting on review panels. Could you comment around whether they are able to, I guess, prevent an application from going through the assessment process if they feel that there hasn't been genuine consumer engagement?
They don't stop at getting to the panel necessarily. No, I haven't seen that. But at panel, I'm now talking particularly about MRFF, particularly in the missions. There is a consumer person, so the missions, as you know, are in particular sort of usually patient populations. So I've sat on the brain injury mission, cardiovascular mission, so forth. So they have an advocate or a consumer rep on those, and they comment on every grant. So, normally if the primary spokesperson, the secondary spokesperson comment, and then everybody else can comment if they want. But they comment on every grant. So it's a huge workload for them. And they are listened to very carefully. And I've seen this evolve over the last probably 5 years with MRFF. And if it definitely happens, if they can say with evidence that this is tokenistic, this relationship is tokenistic, or the engagement is, hasn't happened, it's just a name on a grant, the grant will go down. Because you look at in the criteria in MRFF, and they've got consumer engagement, and there's actually criteria: consumer engagement, clear framework, clear statement of engagement, or however it is, or not clear, or questionable, or something. There's actually phrases in the criteria that we can use to say, no, it's only a 4, or it's a 5, or no, this is a 6. Never given a 7. So if you just whacked on, somebody's name and there's no evidence of the input that they've had or the level of evidence. So what I'm suggesting to people now is, so for example, here at UniSA, we've got a framework based on the IASP where you can state the level of engagement. Is it co-design? Is it full co-creation, or is it advisory? Is it whatever? It doesn't necessarily matter, so long as you say this is what it is and this is how it has happened, this is how it will happen. Now the same thing too, if you are including explicitly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participants, then there'll be an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researcher advisor who reads the grant, and they will sync it too if it's not real. And if it's not sufficiently, if the people in the team aren't sufficiently of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander identification, and their role isn't clear, ba-bum. So don't pretend. It sounds kind of obvious to say, but yeah.
And I think that picks up nicely on the point that both of you made around it's about building trust. And if you're putting in an application that is already having reviewers or funders question your authenticity, then not a good start.
No, even a tiny question mark, because like I said, we're looking for reasons to not read this, because we've got 24 others to read. So don't give us a reason, just make us go, oh, I love this. I trust them.
Well, we don't have any other questions that have come through, and we've just hit 1 p.m. So I'm just going to again say thank you both so much for sharing so much useful information. I mean, Elodie, the BidRite template that you had, the ISBP and 3 to 5 key messages, readability, and that function in Word. I did not know about that, so that's fantastic. And those really practical ways to make the content pop, and the 3-draft process. Such useful information. And thank you very much for sharing those trade secrets. And Susan, to get an insight from a reviewer's perspective, I think is we're very fortunate for you to share that perspective, because it's quite rare to be able to have access to that. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So before I click end meeting, I'll just remind everyone that next week it'll be our final week, and we've got another 2 fantastic presenters in the form of Callum McPherson and Julio Rossi, and they'll be sharing perspectives on presenting to the media and creating compelling visual presentations. So I hope to see as many of you here same time next week. Or actually, no, it's be a bit later. I think Agostina scheduled that one a little later. And please also just let your colleagues and networks know about the Spotlight series. Everyone's welcome. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.